The story begins with a scene from 1964. We see a man named Richard, who everyone calls Richie, in a bar. Richie is on a date with a woman named Deborah. As they start talking, Deborah asks Richie what he does for a living. Richie replies that he makes cartoons. However, after sharing this, he becomes quiet and doesn't offer much more information about himself. Deborah continues to ask him questions one after another, but Richie doesn't seem interested in talking about himself. It's clear that he doesn't want to share much. Deborah does most of the talking, while Richie stays mostly silent. After some time, Deborah gets bored. Richie then decides to leave her. Once Deborah leaves, Richie joins his friends, Terry and Dino. He starts playing pool with them. They ask him how his date with Deborah went. Meanwhile, another man named Earl overhears the conversation. When he hears Deborah's name, he mentions that many of his friends have dated her. Earl claims he has known Deborah since childhood and says that everyone thinks she is promiscuous, claiming she sleeps with anyone. Hearing this, Richie feels somewhat upset. He continues playing pool and eventually wins the game. After winning, he starts arguing or having a disagreement with Earl. But Richie's friends step in and stop him. After this, everyone heads home. As soon as Earl gets into his car, Richie approaches him, bites his neck, and kills him. Time passes and we see a scene from a year later. Richie is in a hospital. A nurse informs him that he has become a father. We then learn that Richie has married Deborah, who has just given birth to their daughter. After this, Richie leaves the hospital and goes to his lab. It is revealed that Richie actually makes pornographic videos, but he lies to everyone, claiming he works for Disney. Later, one of Richie's friends, named Lopron, calls him. Lopron tells Richie that a client is pressuring him and needs 7 videos delivered by the next day. Richie responds that he is tired and plans to go home to rest, saying he will think about it tomorrow. As Richie is about to leave, 3 men arrive at his lab. They are looking for Dino. Richie tells them Dino isn't there, but the 3 men start forcing their way inside. One of them, named Roy, is the leader of the group. Roy's 2 companions are named Josh and Mickey. Richie keeps trying to explain to them that Dino isn't there, but they don't listen and force their way into his lab. When Richie refuses them again, they hand him a gun and tell him to meet them the next day. They warn him that if he doesn't show up, they can do something terrible and he won't even see it coming. After this threat, they leave. Richie then goes home and starts feeding his daughter. While doing so, he notices a newspaper and realizes that Deborah is looking for a bigger house for them. The next day, Richie meets Roy, who is sitting in his car. Roy gives Richie a gun, trying to intimidate him. However, Roy notices that Richie shows no fear. His face remains calm and unshaken. Just then, a beggar approaches and knocks on the car window. Seeing this, Roy hands the gun to Richie and orders him to kill the beggar. Roy says that if Richie kills him, it will prove his capability, and Roy will consider whether Richie can work for him or not. Without hesitation, Richie steps out and kills the beggar. Witnessing this, Roy is pleased and decides to put Richie to work for him. Richie is now working as a hitman for Roy. Along with that, he also works for Sully. Time keeps passing. As the years go by, Richie becomes very wealthy. Then, we see a scene set 10 years later. Richie is now extremely rich. He owns a luxurious house and lives a lavish lifestyle. One evening, Richie, Deborah, and their friends go out for dinner. Many of Deborah's friends are there. During the conversation, a woman suddenly comments, "You've become really rich. No one can make this much money just by making Disney movies. He must be making adult films instead." After hearing this, everyone starts laughing. Deborah also laughs and says Richie is now in the money exchange business. We've earned all this wealth from that. Hearing this, Richie starts thinking. We realize that he has never told Deborah the truth about his work. In front of his wife, his image is completely clean. After dinner, they all leave. Then, we see a scene from a year later. Josh is making a deal. As soon as he gets the money, he kills 2 Cuban gangsters and leaves. Meanwhile, Richie is with Deborah. As the 2 of them get intimate, their daughters suddenly come to the door. One of Richie and Deborah's daughters says she is scared. She comes and sleeps between them. For a while, they talk about the Vietnam War. After some time, their daughter leaves. Richie and Deborah start getting intimate again. The next day, we see a man named Leo. He works for Gambino. Gambino's men had killed Josh and then disappeared. Leo meets Roy and tells him, Gambino is furious. If Josh isn't killed soon, he will come after you. Hearing this, Roy gets angry and says, Josh was like a son to me. I won't kill him so easily. Leave this to me. I know how to handle Josh. The next morning, Richie gets ready. His daughter Annabelle helps him. After dropping her off at school, Richie goes to a motel. Inside the motel, a boy named Marty is with a girl named Alex. They are getting intimate when Richie enters the room and catches Marty. Marty talks to Roy, but while speaking, he realizes he won't make it out alive. Before killing him, Richie says, "Pray to God." The moment Marty finishes his prayer, Richie shoots him. Richie then senses someone else in the room. He opens the closet door and finds Alex hiding inside. However, he doesn't kill her and instead runs out. As Richie and Alex come downstairs, they see another man named Frizzy, who also works for Roy. Frizzy lets them leave, but as soon as they step outside, he blows up the entire motel. Richie gets into his car. Frizzy sees Alex and says, "You have to kill her. She saw your face." But Richie refuses. "I have rules. I don't kill women or children." Frizzy doesn't listen and drives off to kill Alex. Before he can, Richie shoots him and warns, "Don't make this mistake. You can't kill a woman in front of me." Meanwhile, Alex runs away. Frizzy, furious, looks at Richie and says, "You owe a death." Then he leaves. Richie goes to Roy, who is already angry. Roy confronts him. "What's wrong with you? Today, you let a witness go? Do you know how dangerous that is? If that girl talks, you'll go to prison forever. I'm already under pressure. If we don't handle the Josh situation soon, Gambino will destroy us. The police are after us too. So I'm shutting everything down for a few days until things cool off. You should go home. I don't have any work for you right now." Richie starts worrying because now he is unemployed. He then decides to visit the state prison. There, he meets his older brother, Joey, who has been in jail for the past 12 years. The moment Joey sees Richie, he gets angry. "I've been in prison for 12 years and you didn't visit me for 11 of them. Why are you here now? You should be in jail too. You've done worse things than I have." Joey continues, "I made one mistake. You have rules. You don't touch women and children, but I raped and killed a girl. That's why I'm here. But I have a feeling you'll end up here too, sooner or later." After saying this, Joey demands, "I need a lawyer. Bring me one." Richie refuses. Joey gets even angrier. "You don't deserve to be called my brother. I'd rather not have a brother like you. I'll keep rotting in here and you won't care. So why did you even come?" Richie leaves while Joey keeps shouting after him. After leaving the prison, Richie goes home to his family. That day, both of his daughters are going skating. While they skate, Richie and Deborah watch them. Meanwhile, Deborah is talking to their neighbors. After skating, they head home, but while driving, Richie seems lost in his thoughts. He isn't paying attention to the road. Suddenly, he crashes into another car. The owner of the other car gets out, furious. Richie also steps out, equally angry. But when the man sees Richie's face, he gets scared and quickly gets back into his car. Richie assumes the situation is over. However, after a moment, the man steps out again and starts hurling insults at Richie. He even insults Richie's entire family. Seeing this, Richie becomes furious. As soon as the traffic light turns green, he starts chasing the man. The man tries to escape, but Richie keeps following him. Meanwhile, Deborah and their two daughters keep screaming, begging Richie to stop. Deborah repeatedly tells him to let it go, but Richie doesn't listen to anyone. Finally, a taxi stops between Richie's car and the other man's car, forcing Richie to stop. Deborah is furious. She yells at Richie, saying harsh things to him. Then they return home. Later, while Richie is in the shower, memories from his childhood flood his mind. He remembers how his father used to beat Joey. Richie used to watch but never had the courage to stop his father. Since then, he has become emotionally numb. He doesn't feel anything, no matter what happens. After his shower, Richie comes out and sits in silence. Deborah notices and approaches him. She asks, "What's wrong? Can you tell me? I've never seen you this upset." Richie tries to speak, but in the middle of their conversation, Richie loses control again. He starts cursing himself and throwing things around in frustration. Deborah struggles to calm him down. Richie finally says, "I'm just worried about my family. I want to take care of you all somehow." Hearing this, Deborah hugs him. After a while, Richie calms down. The next day, he goes to meet Richie, the other Richie. He explains everything to him. Now that Richie is unemployed, he needs money. So he asks if there's any work for him. The other Richie responds, "I have plenty of work. If you want, we can be partners." Richie agrees. Then, the other Richie takes him to his ice cream truck. Inside, there are several dead bodies. "I keep the bodies here until things cool down," he explains. "Once the heat dies down, I start burying them." Now, both of them begin cutting up the bodies together. For the first time in a while, Richie feels a little happy. That night, when he gets home, he takes Deborah to a fancy restaurant. They have dinner and dance together. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Roy is trying to negotiate with Gambino. Despite his repeated efforts, Gambino refuses to settle, and so does Leo. They are furious because Josh killed Gambino's men. With no other option left, Roy publicly kills Josh in front of everyone. But now, Roy is deeply troubled because he just killed Josh. Leo watches for a moment, then leaves. A while later, Leo meets with Richie. "I have a job for you," he says, handing Richie a photo of the target. He offers $40,000 for the hit. Additionally, if the death appears natural, he'll pay an extra $10,000. No one should suspect it was a murder. Richie agrees. Soon after, he tells the other Richie about the job. "If we can make it look natural, we'll get a lot of money," he explains. Richie asks, "How are we going to do it?" The other Richie comes up with a plan. He brings cyanide powder and says, "We'll go to the club and throw this on him. He'll choke and die without leaving any evidence." Richie agrees. That night, they prepare everything and head to the club, where their target is dancing. Slowly, Richie approaches the man and blows cyanide powder into his nose. As soon as the powder enters, the man starts choking. Within moments, he collapses and dies. The two leave the club immediately. But on their way out, Terry spots Richie. He loudly calls out his name and rushes over. "Do you have any work for me?" Terry asks. Richie ignores him and walks away. The next day, Richie is at home, writing a poem for his daughter. His daughter, Annabelle, is turning 16 today. While everyone is celebrating her birthday party, Richie quietly sits and writes. The doorbell rings. When Richie opens the door, he sees two of Roy's men. Without saying much, they take him to a car where Roy is waiting inside. They force Richie into the car. Meanwhile, Annabelle watches everything from inside the house. Inside the car, Roy pulls out a gun and points it at Richie. "You're working for my enemy, Leo," Roy says angrily. "I won't tolerate this." Before he can say more, Annabelle steps outside. Seeing her, Richie quickly tells everyone not to do anything. Annabelle walks toward the car and knocks on the window. Roy, noticing her presence, lowers the gun and lets Richie go. Richie heads back inside the house, but he is extremely frustrated. Later, he confronts Terry. "What did you tell Roy?" he demands. Terry insists, "I didn't say anything to anyone." Meanwhile, Freezy keeps calling Richie repeatedly. After ignoring the calls for a while, Richie finally picks up. Freezy tells him, "I have another job for you." But Richie isn't interested. "I don't have time for this," he replies. Instead, he passes the job to Terry. The next day, Richie goes to meet Leo to collect his $50,000 payment, but Leo refuses to pay. "I'm not giving you any money," he says coldly. "Roy found out about the murder. It's no longer a secret. There's no point in paying you now." Hearing this, Richie gets furious. Leo notices and calmly warns him, "If you kill me, your problems will only get worse." Richie grits his teeth and turns to leave. As he's walking away, Leo calls out, "You're a terrible father, and a terrible husband too. You never take care of your family. They're unlucky to have you as their father." Richie pulls out his gun and shoots Leo, killing him instantly. He leaves Leo's body in the car and walks away. Shortly after, Richie gets terrible news. His daughter has been in an accident. He rushes to the hospital and finds Annabelle with a broken leg. Deborah is devastated. "This is all because of you," she snaps at Richie. "You're always busy with work. You have no time for us." Hearing this, Richie doesn't say anything. He simply leaves. He goes to meet Freezy. During their conversation, Freezy keeps asking Richie for money over and over again. Richie, already angry, finally loses control and kills Freezy too. Later, he meets his friend Dino. Dino tells him, "Someone killed Terry. The killer is called Iceman. Whoever he kills, he freezes their body." Hearing this, Richie immediately realizes that Freezy was the one who killed Terry. But there's another problem. Now the police are onto him. Richie knows he needs work. It's the only way he can keep his life together. He meets another hitman named Dominic. Now they will work together. But Richie knows he can't kill recklessly like before. He has to be careful. Dominic soon brings a new job. Richie starts preparing. He takes out cyanide, mixes it with peanut butter, and spreads it on a slice of bread. Before leaving, he places it carefully in the trunk of his car. Hearing this, Richie stops in his tracks, his anger boiling over. Before using the cyanide, Richie decides to test it on a cat. He spreads the poisoned peanut butter and waits to see if it works. Just then, Deborah gets into his car and they drive off together. 5 minutes pass. Richie glances back and notices the cat is still alive, walking around as if nothing happened. Something feels off. Before he can react, the police surround his car from all sides. They take Deborah into custody and move in to arrest Richie. That's when Richie realizes the truth. Dominic was an undercover agent all along. The police have gathered enough evidence against him. He has no way out. Richie is arrested, and a full investigation begins. During the court trial, Richie sees his family in the courtroom. Deborah looks at him with disappointment. She has finally left him. After all these years, she realizes he had been lying to her the entire time. The news spreads everywhere. Richie is a ruthless killer, responsible for countless murders. He is sentenced and sent to prison. Years pass. Richie grows old. One day, some people ask him, "Do you regret all the terrible things you've done in your life?" Richie sighs. "No," he says. "I only regret one thing, that my family suffered because of me." And with that, the film ends.